start the show, you can find us on Twitter. I'm at Roy Billington, and Raf is at rgarcia_sports. And you can also follow the website on Instagram and Facebook as well, just at MMA Ratings, and on Twitter at MMARatings.net. So it's been quite a quiet week for MMA this week. Raf, what have you had on your mind?
It's definitely, it's definitely been very quiet. I've kind of enjoyed the time off, just because it's given me an opportunity to catch up on some other things to kind of enjoy some. I definitely enjoyed my Saturday. Normally, I am in front of a TV or in front of a computer, like come 5 o'clock every Saturday. But this week I got to relax. I was actually asleep and in bed by 7 o'clock, which is ridiculous. But hey, I made the most of it. How about you, Roy?
Yeah, for me it was pretty cool because obviously I live in the UK where UFC events don't usually finish till 6 or 7 a.m. So this week obviously I haven't had to stay up late. I've enjoyed I had a day off from work as well, so I just got to enjoy chill out all day. Worked out a bit, and now I'm just excited, looking forward to another fight-free week.
Yeah, we definitely have a good little bit of time before the next show comes up, but there was still a good amount of news that came out this week in the sport itself. So I guess let's just go ahead and start talking about some of the news aspects that came out from this past week of action. I want to say probably the biggest thing that came out this week was the announcement of Nick Diaz and Anderson Silva at UFC 183, I believe, on January 31st. When you saw that announcement, what was your first reaction?
Yeah, I'm not a big fan. I think it has the makings of being a decent fight. It'll do good pay-per-view buys, but if Nick Diaz wants to be a champion, why is he moving up a weight class to fight against Anderson Silva? He's never fought at middleweight. He's fought at catchweight against guys like Scott Smith and Frank Shamrock. But he's never fought anyone like Anderson Silva. People who say Nick Diaz has a chance against Anderson Silva are a bit deluded, in my opinion, because Anderson Silva's never been beaten by anyone like Chris Weidman beat him. Chris Weidman gave him a beating. But before the Chris Weidman fight, if someone would have said to you, what would happen if Nick Diaz and Anderson Silva fought, everyone without doubt would say Anderson Silva knocked Nick Diaz out. And just because Anderson lost 2 fights to a skilled opponent like Chris Weidman, it doesn't change in my mind. I think Nick Diaz is going to get beaten, and not only is he going to get beaten, his commodity with UFC is going to be killed in one foul swoop.
So you think it's gonna be that bad, huh?
Yeah, I think he's going to get beaten. And then, it's the one pay-per-view draw for the welterweight division in absence of George St. Pierre gone, essentially. He's lost 3 fights in a row. There's nothing left for him. Whereas if the UFC were to put him up against, say, Matt Brown on Fox, or even Rory McDonald in the Halifax card before they booked in Tarek Safdien, they could build stars from Nick Diaz's name. With Anderson Silva, they're not building a star. Anderson's already the greatest of all time. There's not much for Anderson left to do. What does Anderson gain from beating a welterweight with 2 straight losses? He doesn't gain a lot either.
So let me ask you this: if the first thing I thought of is this like the main event of that card? Like, do they place anything else around there, or is that just it?
I reckon they will play something around it. I'm not too sure yet. I wouldn't be surprised if it was maybe a flyweight co-main event. Get Demetrius on another big card and hopefully give him a big push. But I don't know. It's going to be interesting. It's on Super Bowl weekend, so I'm guessing the UFC will try and make a big event out of it. But how much interest is there in this fight? I think from the MMA world, there's a huge interest. But from the everyday Joe, who, like, Nick Diaz is a huge draw within MMA. Essentially, I don't think he's a massive mainstream draw, and he never will be. Anderson Silva, toward the later portions of his career, became the big draw in America. But he wasn't in his early portions of his career either. So seeing that he's been knocked out twice now, or beaten twice convincingly, will the fans still clamour to see him? I guess there's the allure of seeing the fighter coming back from the big injury and seeing if he can come back just as good. But I'd be amazed if it done more than 700,000 pay-per-view buys.
I think you're right when you say that. where he's going to catch a lot of the attention. Outside of that, I don't believe he'll catch a whole lot of attention. Like, for example, I don't believe ESPN will be interested in having him on First Take, for example, or having him on any other show just because he's not that type of personality, like they were able to do with like a Ronda Rousey or a Chris Weidman. So I can see where your point can be made there. I wouldn't be surprised if it didn't do 700,000 to begin with. I'm looking at maybe 500K. It's kind of early to say, and the UFC is definitely going to get behind it and promote it as well as they can. But I'm just thinking that the fight will be interesting to the MMA community itself. As you were saying, the big platforms that follow the sport may not be as interested in catching a hold of it just because of who is placed on the card. So I see your concerns. I think it's going to draw attention, but just not the type of attention outside of the MMA world.
Yeah, and I think a lot of media will have hesitation about booking Nick Diaz because he's notoriously no-showed a lot of events. I know famously he no-showed Michael Chavello's show for HDNet after they flew out to do the voice versus with Nick Diaz. He completely no-showed that. He's no-showed a numerous amount of UFC press events. So I think, like the mainstream, the ESPNs won't want to waste their money and their time on a guy like Nick Diaz.
Yeah, I know, and that's a big problem, because if they're trying to kind of market him in a way that will draw that same type of attention, they definitely have a uphill battle on their hands.
Yeah.
And you also said that what else would be a part of that card? You had mentioned Demetrius Johnson. He fights this month, actually. He's on UFC 177. So I think maybe a January turnaround might be a little bit too soon. I don't know, because he's definitely one of the more active champions, and I know after he defeated Ali Bagautinov, he was talking about taking a little bit of time off because I think this will be, like he's been defending that belt probably more than any other champion who has had a title in that time span. So I'm not sure if he'll be put on that card. But what about if Ronda Rousey was placed on that card? Do you think that would be something that would kind of catch enough attention to kind of lift that card above your current expectations?
It would, but in my opinion, Ronda Rousey is the world champion. She's defended her title numerous times. She should be the main event if she is on that card. She shouldn't play second fiddle to two people who are coming off two straight losses.
I think she would. She would be the main event. I think if they could find an interesting opponent for her. I mean, maybe by that time they have Holly Holm has already have won one, or maybe has competed once, or maybe even they can finally book the fight with Gina Carano. There are some options there for Rousey if she was to make herself available for that fight.
Yeah, that is true.
So let's keep going on from there. And the other big announcement this week is that the UFC is trying. It's rumored. It hasn't been confirmed by either group yet, as far as I've seen. But the UFC is trying to book Donald Cerrone and Eddie Alvarez for UFC 178. What was your first reaction when you saw that?
My first reaction was to think that Scott Coker is a bit of a genius. If he lets Eddie Alvarez go, with that he'll immediately kill fighter hesitation to join Bellator, because obviously Bjorn isolated a lot of fighters by not letting Eddie Alvarez leave to go to the UFC the first time around. I think if Scott lets Alvarez go, immediately distance himself from the old regime and breathe new life into Bellator, which would be a very, very wise idea. But with that, I think it's a great fight. I think Donald Cerrone is one of the best fighters in the world until he faces a top 5 opponent, and then he seems to self-destruct. It's not even a matter of skill. Against Nate Diaz, he just didn't show up. He really just didn't perform that night. So it'll be interesting to see how he does against someone like Eddie Alvarez, who has big experience. But the key with this one, Eddie Alvarez's big experience might be negated by the fact that he is coming into the UFC. Will he suffer from the octagon jitters? Because obviously it's been years in the making, his joining the UFC, and will he be afraid when the limelight hits him?
So let me ask you this: I know when I first saw the card, I see there's definitely potential there for both guys. That would be a great win for Eddie, to kind of introduce himself to the UFC, and that'll also be a big win for Cerrone to defeat a guy who's been like the number one lightweight for majority of the time, other than that the hiccup he had against Michael Chandler. He's been the number one lightweight, probably one of the number one fighters not under the UFC's banner. So that could be a big win for both guys. I also see it going. It could be very. It's very risky for both fighters too, because lightweight is a very deep division, and for Eddie to come in, he could easily lose 3 fights in a row, just because of the top of that weight class is so stacked. Even I can see him maybe like losing or going like 1-3 in his first 4 fights or something like that, just because that weight class is probably like the best in the sport right now at this point in time. And then with Cerrone, like you mentioned, he doesn't seem to be that same guy when he faces the top opponents in his weight class. My question is for him is he kind of overdoing it? This would be his 4th fight this year already, and he's been putting together some good finishes very quickly. But as I think we touched on this last week about if he's kind of running himself into the ground. That's what a lot of people were saying when he fought Nate Diaz, that he was having a hard time in that fight just because he was so worn down from competing so much over the past year. So is he setting himself up for like another letdown in that same way?
I don't know. I think throughout his career he has performed best when he's fought regularly. May be detrimental for him to fight 4 or 5 times a year, maybe, perhaps, but if he didn't fight as often as he does now, these opportunities wouldn't present themselves toward him. I feel that if I was Don Cerrone, I'd be jumping this fight. This is such a huge opportunity for him, and this truly a win against Eddie Alvarez and a finish against Eddie Alvarez will more than likely secure him a title shot.
Yeah, I can agree with that too. I think if he was able to put off like a very big win, he would easily leapfrog a lot of the other guys and be able to get the winner of maybe like the Gilbert Melendez Anthony Pettis fight that's coming up. Even if it is Anthony Pettis and he already has that one win over Cerrone at this point in time.
Yeah, I like the division. I love the lightweight division, but it's somewhat annoying the fact that Anthony Pettis is just so injury prone. It's going to be hard watching him as champion because throughout his career, it's a good year if he fights more than twice. So I think that division is going to come to a standstill, and that's going to provide a lot of problems too moving forward.
Yeah, no, like right now, he's not even hurt. We're just waiting on the next season of Tough, which is unfortunate, man. Like putting champions on Tough is definitely a problem because it's just so hard to kind of get those guys and maybe keep them active. They definitely keep them tied up for an extended period of time. So that's just the situation that we're in right now. I think the UFC is going to continue putting guys on that show because they think it's the best way to kind of gain exposure for themselves and their champions. But at the same time, they're going to have to deal with these type of logjam type issues where guys are just so backed up that the whole weight class is just kind of stuck.
Yeah, that's true. But personally, I don't know if too many people who religiously watch The Ultimate Fighter anymore. I think the champions might well be wasted on it. I think the people who watch The Ultimate Fighter now religiously are hardcore fans. I don't think it attracts so many new viewers anymore. So it's as if they're spending their champions on winning over fans that are already fans of the sport.
Fights that were announced this week that cost. Did you hear me there, Roy?
No, I missed you.
I said, what are some of the other fights that came across this week that kind of caught your eye?
Justin Scoggins v. John Moraga seemed like a brilliant fight. Justin Scoggins, I think, has a lot to prove now following his last fight. The same can be said for John Moraga. John Moraga obviously has had a very, very interesting UFC career so far. He's had some really great moments. Obviously, the wins leading up to the fight with Demetrius Johnson were great. His victory over Dustin Ortiz too was great. But he's coming over a very disappointing loss to John Dodson, whereas Justin Scoggins tasted defeat for the first time in his career against Dustin Ortiz. So it's going to be interesting to see how both guys bounce back. I think Justin Scoggins has such a bright future ahead of him. We've talked about this. I think he's going to be a future champion. Is John Moraga a step too far at this point in his career? Perhaps. It's going to be interesting to see how he does against a high-level opponent like Moraga, though.
So this is one of the reasons why I kind of like the flyweight division, because I feel like no one's ever really out of a title shot opportunity, because they're still trying to build the group, but it's not like they're trying to build a division where there isn't talent. And I'll compare it to like the women's bantamweight group right now. I'm not saying that there isn't talent there, but it's hard to see anyone beyond Ronda Rousey actually being a champion or even necessarily competing for the champion. At flyweight, you have guys who can like legit, who would be interesting matchups against the current champion Demetrius Johnson right now, and who can even necessarily take the belt and go on a good run. I mean, you have Ian McCall, you have John Dodson, you have Zach Rakowski, who no one's really talking about. You have Justin Scoggins who's there. You have John Lineker, and I know I'm forgetting guys. Like that's five guys right there who could be paired with the champion right this moment, and no one will complain about any of those matchups. So both John Moraga and Justin Scoggins are really on the cusp of getting like, or it'll be John's second shot, it'll be Justin's first shot, but you know they may be a good 3-fight win streak away before being put back into that title picture.
Yeah, that's very true.
How do you see this fight going?
To be honest, I think Moraga should take it, purely based on experience alone. I think Moraga has fought the better guys. He's been in there with the champ, and even coming out with a loss, I think that grows a fighter a lot. Whereas Justin Scoggins, he's only 22. He's only had 10 fights. I think he's bound for greatness at some point, but I think right now a fight with John Moraga is a little bit too much for him. How do you see it
I don't
going?
necessarily agree with you. And I'm gonna say this because I didn't think that John Moraga was. I didn't think he defeated Dustin Ortiz when they fought. I want to say it was last year. I thought that Ortiz had done enough to take that fight. I've never been too sold on John. I think he's a great fighter, but I don't think he's one of those guys who fits within like the top five of that weight class right now. I think he's a good someone who can kind of be like a measuring stick for everybody else. I think Justin Scoggins wins this fight. I think that the last one that he lost to Ortiz was very tough for him, but I see him being able to beat John Moraga and kind of going on a run that we talked about.
I think it's bound to happen at some point. I think Scoggins has the potential to be a champion, and I think over the coming years we are going to see him come on at this big win streak. But I'm just a little bit apprehensive to pick him over Moraga because Moraga has beaten the better guys. He's beaten Chris Carrioso. He's tapped out Chris Carrioso, and Chris Carrioso's fighting for the belt now.
Oh, that doesn't mean anything. The only reason why he's fighting for the belt is because no one else answered the phone. Like seriously, like I was completely shocked when that fight was announced. Because he's on I want to say a 3-fight win streak, but maybe they pulled the trigger too quickly on that one. Like I said, he was the only guy who answered the phone. Maybe that is the actual truth, because that fight kind of came out of nowhere. And is he even ranked in the top 10 in that weight class right now? I'm not even sure. I'm going to have to go ahead and look. But that's definitely a questionable matchmaking move. I understand that they want to keep their champion as active as they possibly can, but that's not the fight to make, in my opinion. I would have much rather have seen them give a fight against John Lineker or I can't pronounce the other guy's name that he just fought, but the fight that they put on was much more entertaining than I think anything Kiriakou has done in the UFC. So I'm not too entertained by that fight announcement myself.
Yeah, to be honest, I think it's just a matter of keeping Demetrius busy. That's why that fight was booked. But yeah, because Demetrius is just winning the fights. He's won what four fights. He defended the belt 4 times now, I think.
Yeah, he defeated Joseph again, John Dodson, John Moraga, Ali Bagapino.
Yeah, and still he hasn't got a following. This guy's creeping up on it. He's gonna break records soon, and still no one will know who he is. It's very odd.
That's definitely unfortunate. And speaking of the current champion, as I mentioned, he's fighting on UFC 177, where he will be defending that belt against Chris Carriazo. But that is looking like a very good card. It's the next UFC numbered event coming up, and it's 2 title fights are scheduled for that one, with TJ Dillashaw defending against Hannah Burrell, and the aforementioned flyweight fight. But if you look at like the UFC events that are coming over the next couple of weeks, next couple of months, what are some of the ones that kind of catch your eye to begin with? Like, which ones are most attractive to you?
The one I'm looking forward to most, just purely on a fight on how the fights will go basis, is probably the UFC Japan card coming up. I'm really excited to see Mark Hunt v Roy Nelson. I think that has a lot of promise. Misha Tate v Rindakai should be a great fight. We've got the return of Sexyama. You have Takanori Gomi v Miles Shori and Uriah Faber fighting as well. So I think that card is bound for an exciting night of fights. But other than that, there's the obvious. There's a big title fights coming up. We've got John Jones defending the belt against Daniel Cormier, which is going to be amazing. I'm so excited for that fight.
Let's touch on that UFC Japan card. I had actually completely forgot about that event. I mean, like I used to look forward to seeing Yoshihiro Akiyama fight because I felt like he always just put on exciting contests, even though he was consistently losing. Thought that he lost that fight against Alan Belcher years ago. But I had completely looked over that one. I mean, it kind of escaped my view, but that is a pretty good card there as well. Even the Misha Tate fight, I feel like she's going to dominate the ring, but that's another a big Japanese fighter who has a huge following over there. So I feel like the UFC has done a good job of putting together some of the people that are going to be worth watching that night. When just for myself, looking at the UFC schedule, obviously UFC 178 has my full attention right now. It's a little while away. It's on September 27th, but just looking at the potential card that the UFC has put together for that, I mean, it's almost impossible to kind of tell where the main card begins and the prelims fight. I mean, where the prelims end. I mean, they have Kat Zingano coming back, Tim Kennedy and Yoel Romero, potentially Donald Cerrone and Eddie Alvarez. They have so many good fights on that one card that it would be tough to kind of see where each fight is going to go. But I'm looking forward to that one the most.
Yeah, that fight card is pretty amazing. I'm hoping the co-main event is Dominic Cruz v Mizugaki. I'll be very disappointed if it isn't, though.
Say that again.
I'm really hoping that the UFC goes for Dominic Cruz's co-main event over Conor McGregor's fight. I think to not put Dominic Cruz in the co-main event would be very disrespectful on the UFC's behalf.
I mean, I wouldn't be mad if they put the Tim Kennedy fight as a co-main event, in my opinion, because like let's say that's a great fight and Vitor Belfort doesn't do what he needs to do to face Chris Weidman on January 6th, they're going to need one of those guys to step up. In my opinion, like that's going to be the first group that they go for, either one of those guys or the winner of Jacare versus Musashi, which I believe is this month or early next month. So I feel like that fight kind of deserves more attention than Dominic Cruz.
I don't know. I think it's hard. Dominic Cruz is the champion that never lost his belt. He's the returning superstar. He headlined the big July 4th show not too long ago. He's beaten Demetrius Johnson. He's beaten Uriah Faber. This guy is the best, or was the best. And the interesting question comes: is he still the best? We're going to get to see him fight against a tough guy in Takeo Mizugaki, and I think for what he's done for the lower weight divisions, he deserves to be co-main event. If it wasn't for guys like him and Uriah Faber, there wouldn't be any like flyweights main event in UFC shows. These guys are the people who brought the lighter divisions into the UFC and made the fans listen up.
I agree with you to an extent. I'm not going to call him a superstar because I guarantee you, he's been able to get a lot of good exposure because he's been sitting at the desk for UFC Fox, which has been great. But he wasn't a superstar when he was active. I mean, a lot of people, even though he went on that ridiculously insane run where he was beating guys left and right, people would hesitate to even put him in like their top 3 and top 5. That was an argument I would consistently have, that he's always getting overlooked when those conversations come up, even though he's beating the best guys. So I'm not even going to call him a superstar. But you are right with saying that he has done a lot for the lighter weight classes. I just think with the way the middleweight class is kind of like the darling of the UFC right now, with Chris Weidman as their champion, I would not be surprised one bit if Tim Kennedy and Yoel Romero were the co-main event, in hope of creating a star that may need to fight Chris Weidman come January?
I think perhaps they could be co-main event, but Tim Kennedy kind of rubs a lot of people the wrong way. Personally, there's just something about him that I can't get a hold of as a fan, and I just don't
He's a
really
jackass.
empathize with him enough.
I mean, he does say some ridiculous stuff, and that's just where we are in the sport right now. I mean, Chael Sonnen was doing it for years, and no one really complains. So he definitely does say some things that are kind of off the cuff. Like, I don't know if you saw the interview he did. I want to say earlier this week that just passed. He was talking about having to, being on call to fight Chris Weidman if Vitor doesn't step in, and then maybe even cutting down to 170 to fight Robbie Lawler for a second time. And even though he was saying some interesting things, it's just the way he did say it. I can understand how it could come off wrong and rub some people the wrong way. But I have no problem with Tim Kennedy. His fighting style may not necessarily be quote unquote exciting, but he gets the job done. I think he's been put on a pretty good run right now that I could see him being made as the co-main event for that night.
I see Tim Kennedy's popularity being really limited to the United States. I don't think a lot of fans outside the United States empathize with him. He's very pro-army, obviously being a Marine, and obviously that doesn't rub well with a lot of people. A lot of nations outside the US don't really empathize with the whole soldier thing, and he, to be honest, he hasn't really even seemed to catch the attention of the service men and women in America either. So he has a niche that he can kind of exploit, but he's done it badly. As you said, nobody batted an eyelid when Chael Sonnen was trash talking, but Chael Sonnen did it well. He did it in an engaging way, and it just seems like everything Tim Kennedy does comes across like a bad WCW wrestler.
I can definitely understand what you're saying there. And I see how people can kind of be a little bit turned off by what he's saying, but it's definitely, that's just the game that we're in right now, and I don't have any problem with what Tim's doing. I think he is an entertaining fighter. He's been on a pretty good run as of late, and I can see him being placed as the co-main event for that night.
Yeah, I think, to be honest, it's going to be McGregor. Just going with the ticket sales for UFC Dublin and the hype he's generated. If they don't go for Dominic Cruz, business-wise, they have to go for McGregor. Just because I think if you put if Conor McGregor headlined one pay-per-view and Tim Kennedy headlined the other, Conor McGregor's would exponentially sell out Tim Kennedy's right now.
I can't even disagree with you on that because you're probably right.
Yeah, I think it's a problem. I mean, the fighters aren't popular because of skills, but more so what they do with their mouth. Not to say that Conor McGregor isn't a very talented guy, but a lot of his hype is being built with his mouth, less so with his actions. But yeah, I think a lot of people can learn a lot from him and how he's marketed himself and moved himself forward. Because how many guys come from fighting on a prelim in Sweden to be in a co-main event on one of the biggest cards of the year in what, 2 fights?
He's had 3 in the UFC right now, I believe.
Yeah, but even so, it's just absolutely crazy.
Yeah, it is definitely for sure. So let's talk about one other fight that was announced this week, and that is Rory McDonald and Serge Saffiedine. I think you and I actually touched upon this last week too, as well, when we mentioned these 2 guys meeting. How do you see that fight going? And is this an exciting fight for you? Both of the guys. Rory McDonald's kind of like he's entertaining because he's slightly weird, slightly awkward, and Saffiedine, he doesn't really have too much of a following. He's the last Strikeforce welterweight champion, but other than that, I don't think anybody could really point him out of a lineup at this point in time. So let's talk about 2 things. A, do you think this gets a lot of attention? And B, how do you see this fight going?
Yeah, well, personally, honestly, I'd rather watch paint dry than watch Tarek Saffiedine talk. He's really not entertaining behind the mic. In the cage, he's mildly entertaining. His last fight against Lim on the Singapore card, that wasn't great. Against Nate Marquardt, throughout the fight, it looked like he'd get the finish, but he just didn't get the finish, and it was same with Roger Bowen. Rory McDonald is just thereabouts to being a number 1 contender, and I think this fight has the opportunity to really derail him. I think Saffiedine could eke out a decision, which would be awful for UFC's expansion in Canada at least. But yeah, I'm not too interested in the fight. I think there's a lot better fights that could be made. But moving forward, I guess it's something that's just going to have to happen for Rory's career to develop.
I myself, I'm definitely looking forward to seeing how Roy deals with the questions that Stephanie brings to the cage. I mean, like you know he's going to come out and you know he's going to throw consistent number of leg kick after leg kick, like he did to Nate Marquardt and Ga Young Kim, as we just mentioned. So it'll be interesting to see how Roy deals with that. So I don't think he's faced anyone who's brought that kind of attack into the cage quite yet. So that's that first question that really needs to be answered. The second one is I don't think this fight will really get a lot of attention as well. Um, at this point in time, I don't believe UFC has ever really released the numbers of people who have watched the fight on Fight Pass. So with this event being on that platform, I think they have the opportunity to kind of hide it, to get this fight in, to get it out the way, just to keep Roy active in case of, if he's needed to step in to, earlier than expected to face whoever is the champion of 170. So I think it is a good opportunity for them to kind of sneak that fight in behind a paywall that everybody doesn't necessarily have to see it, but it's an event that needed a main event, and this is a purposeful main event. It's not one that's just like thrown together where neither one of the guys are anywhere near like title shot status, but both of these guys have been putting on a pretty good run as of late. So the fight makes enough sense for me. I believe, I think I'll watch it. It'll definitely catch my attention because I'm just interested in seeing how McDonald really deals with the problems that Stephanie brings to the stage.
It's something that has to happen. But personally, I'd like to see Rory McDonald fight on a pay-per-view co-main event of the Johnny Hendricks Robbie Lawler rematch, perhaps. But again, that's him sitting out for a long time.
Yeah, that's how I thought that they were going to do too. Like how they did it a couple years back, where they booked Carlos Condit and Johnny Hendricks on the same card just in case something happened to GSP or Nick Diaz, I believe, in the main event. They kind of booked everybody together, so knowing that if one person fell off, they had two other opportunities to kind of slide guys in. So I thought that that's what they want to do with Rory as well, but they kind of taken a different route. Let's keep going there and let's talk about some of the action that's going on outside of the UFC. There's actually since there aren't any big UFC events coming up, there actually aren't really any huge MMA events coming up as a whole. The only fight card that's coming up this week that kind of caught my attention is World Series of Fighting 12, which is set for the 9th. But even that fight, that whole card doesn't really carry any big names. Are you familiar with this event at all?
Yeah, I've looked into it a little bit, but honestly, for me, there's no one that I really am excited to see. World Series Fighting has a lot of talented guys, but I don't think they really have any of them on show. It's a bit of a weird one for World Series Fighting because usually their cards are stacked, but this one just doesn't do it for me.
Do you plan on watching it at all, or are you just gonna kind of skip it and catch it
I won't watch it live. After the fact, if I hear there's some good fights, I'll obviously watch them and I'll keep an eye on the results. But to me, I'm just not too pushed. The main event has a guy whose biggest win so far is Antonio McKee, and he's main eventing. So
the only card that's kind of I'm not even gonna say the whole fight has caught my attention, but I'm interested in seeing what Honey Mark does. I was kind of high on him when he was in the UFC. I thought he had a some very good potential, especially being on Nova União, but he just never was able to put it together. He always had weight issues, so I'm looking to see if he has those problems fixed and how he looks coming out this weekend. And Alexis Villa as well. I'm interested in seeing what he can do. But as you mentioned, there aren't a lot of guys who are drawing power, who have any drawing power, excuse me, on this event. But so it's kind of being snuck in to the MMA schedule this week when nothing else is going on.
yeah, it's surprising that World Series of Fighting haven't moved a big name to this card or had a big fight, knowing that there's going to be a gap in the market.
Yeah, that is very true. That is very true. So let me ask you this, are you looking forward to the one FC card on August 19th? I think that's something I'm actually looking forward to. I want to see if Ben Askren can take the one FC welterweight title, like he basically promised everybody that he would. Shinya Aoki is also competing. I always look forward to his fight because you never know what type of submission he'll be able to pull off when he's fighting against Kamal Shalarus. So someone who has knockout power and who can kind of rattle his cage. Uh, Roger Huerta is also fighting as well. He was a potential star in the sport itself. He was the first individual to ever be on the cover of Sports Illustrated. So he had all that riding with him, and then he basically flunked out of the UFC as a whole. So the last time I remember seeing him fight is when he got soccer kicked. Actually, I believe it was in ONE FC, and it was probably one of the most gruesome knockouts I've ever seen. So he's fighting an undefeated fighter. So this fight definitely has caught my attention. It'll be hard to watch because it comes on at like 4 a.m. or something like that. But I hope to do my best to kind of catch this card and see what these guys have to offer.
Yeah, I'm excited to see how Ben Askren does. Ben's obviously a really fun guy to watch. Well, fun guy to see how he performs. Not so much watch his performances usually aren't the best, but it's interesting to see how he does. Shinya Aoki, as you said, it's hard to not watch a fight with Shinya Aoki because he's so exciting. It's always just it's a matter of when he's going to pull off the big submission, and that's always fun to watch. And Roger Huerta always pulls off good fights, exciting fights. The guy he's fighting against too isn't really known, so it's his opportunity to come out. Well, it should be a pretty good fight. It's probably the best we've got going on for a little while.
Okay, so you had to preface how you felt about Ben Askren. I love watching him fight because it's again one of those situations where everyone in the world knows what he's going to do. He's going to take you down and he's going to basically beat on you, but no one seems to be able to stop it. I mean, I think he's gotten 2 stoppages so far in his last 3 fights, or maybe it's 3 or something like that. Because I know he finished his most recent fight by submission. He's not a boring fighter in my opinion. He just fights with the best route for his skill set, and no one can stop him at this point in time. Because it's interesting to me, he fights the exact same way Chael Sonnen does, and no one in their right mind would ever call Chael Sonnen boring. Ben does everything that Chael does, and he talks just as much as Chael Sonnen does, if not more. Man, this guy was at the last UFC pay-per-view, sitting like 3 rows behind Johnny Hendricks and talking smack to Johnny the whole night. Like that takes balls, and that's something that is crazy to me that this guy sat there and did that the whole show. So I have nothing against him, and I hate to see the way he is talked about in the MMA world to begin with.
Yeah, he's very like John Fitch. I personally like watching him and John Fitch because, as you said, it's a matter of what the opponent's going to do, how the opponent's going to counteract what it is. But when I said that he's not exactly interested to watch perform, as in, I'm talking from a general perspective, as in if I was coming from not someone who was really interested in the intricacies of mixed martial arts. For newcomers, Ben Askren's style is very boring. As you said again, he talks a lot like Chael, but he doesn't. Chael just has a certain something about him. The way he talks on the mic is just it's more believable, I think. But with Ben Askren, yeah, he definitely deserves to be in the UFC. Him and Johnny Hendricks obviously had their rivalry in college wrestling, and I think that's something that should be played up by the UFC. Those 2 guys should definitely face off in the octagon at some point.
There's no way on earth you can say what Chael Sonnen says is more believable than what Ben Askren says. There's no way.
I think Chael Sonnen delivers his words better. When Ben Askren talks, he comes across as a creepy guy. He just, I don't know, maybe it's just the way he looks, but he's not very presentable. Chael looks like a politician, one of the politicians that lies to you and you believe it, and you still vote for him again the next time. Chael's that guy.
I mean, let's look at that statement to begin with. To say Chael Sonnen is a politician type guy, I mean, he has a criminal record because of his ability to lie. So that is like, you know what? Maybe he is really a political type figure because he's already set his foot out in that area. But I mean, you can't hate on the fact that Ben Askren is a white guy with an afro. Like, no one can hate on that. I love the way he fights. I've loved him since college, because he's had a different style than everyone else. I would love to see him in the UFC as well to get the opportunity to kind of be on the biggest stage. I want to say he's about he may be 30 years old. I think he's about the same age as me. So, he may be reaching that point where he's going to have that falling off. So I would love to see him on the biggest stage before his career is over. Because I think that this guy has the potential to be the best welterweight in the sport because he can do what other guys can't do when it comes to wrestling. And his striking has kind of come along slowly. He's working with the Rufus Sports guys up there, so you never know what he's learning with um, Duke Rufus and Anthony Pettis and Sergio Pettis, all those guys around him there. But Ben deserves the attention that he deserves at 170, fighting the UFC and fighting in the octagon on a consistent basis.
Yeah, to be honest, I feel he'll probably end up signing again for Bellator before he signs for the UFC. I think he with Bjorn leaving, there could potentially return back to Bellator at some point in the future. I don't see his long-term future lying with ONE FC. And if I remember correctly, after this fight, I think he has two more fights within the next year. Is all he has left on the contract.
Yeah, because I see him going to the UFC actually. Cause I see him going there as more of a Dana White kind of signing him to prove his point. Because Dana's not the biggest Askren fan just for the way he fights. I can see him signing Ben just to kind of prove his point that this guy never really belongs in the UFC. And if he makes that mistake and kind of takes that stance, Ben can go on a run there that can shut him up in a quick motion.
Yeah, and there's also the fact that he's training a lot in Singapore with the guys over there. The sort of the fact that if the UFC has a card going on over that range, they could potentially put Ben Askren in, and maybe even have him in as a late replacement because he has been training there a lot lately.
Yeah, that's another good point there too. So let's keep going forward there. And I don't know if you're going to watch Metamorphosis 4, which is scheduled for this weekend, but it is a very big card that features, we just talked about Chael Sonnen. It features him on the event against Andre Galvao, who's probably one of the best grapplers in the sport today. Who else? Josh Barnett is fighting Dean Lister. So you have one current MMA competitor fighting a former MMA competitor, Dean Lister hasn't been submitted, I believe, in almost 11 years or something like that, something crazy. And Josh Barnett is bringing his catch wrestling style to the Metamoris mat, I should say. And you have Benny Magalhaes, who's another former MMA competitor, taking on Keenan Cornelius, probably another one of the best grapplers in the sport today. My friend Gary Toonan is actually fighting Kip Dale on that card as well too. So there's a lot for me to actually look forward to. Are you planning on watching the event?
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to it. I think a lot of the fights are a bit one-sided. I think Gary's definitely going to beat Kit Dale. I think Galvao is going to play with Chael, as he played with Chris Weidman as well when they grappled against each other. Lister v Barnett could be interesting, but Lister always seems to do just enough. Comparito v Solahubera, that could be interesting. And Keenan Cornelius should, I think, beat Vinny Magalhaes, just considering Vinny's focuses for the last 18 months haven't been more so on MMA.
Well, Vinny was actually supposed to fight against Keenan at Metamoris 3, but he caught that staph infection that kept him off the card. So I still think Keenan will win. I just don't think his focus hasn't necessarily been all on MMA going forward. I thought he actually retired from MMA, but I may be wrong about that. Let me ask you this: do you think that the way they're featuring some big MMA fighters with this card, do you think that's good for the sport? Do you think it's good for the UFC to kind of continue letting their guys go back and forth? Is that something you would want to see going on, or do you think it's kind of making it more into a circus?
I think it's good for Metamoris. I think if they're going to grow, they need to get the UFC fans on board, and I think that's actually happening now. Just speaking from my own perspective, I'd really watch maybe one or two grappling competitions a year, but with Metamoris I'll always watch it because it's interesting. It's got the right mix of MMA guys with jiu-jitsu guys. They've got grapplers from all backgrounds coming together. But they've also got the high production value, and I think that is serving them well. I think it's really good for them. For the UFC, I'm not so sure. I think the UFC will be apprehensive about giving their big name guys fights. I know they have Josh Barnett going against Dean Lister. Josh isn't like such a huge fighter right now, but the UFC wouldn't put Keenan Cornelius in there with John Jones. They know where the bread is buttered, and they wouldn't give their big names fights that they're going to lose in Metamoris.
Let me ask you this then: who are some of the individuals you would like to see competing in Metamoris from the UFC? In my opinion, they have Ronda Rousey there. she's already started to kind of put the seeds out there that she thinks her judo is good enough to go against anyone's um, jiu-jitsu. I would love to see them put her out there. I would love to see like maybe a Damian Maya go as well. They have a good wealth of guys who and women who are some of the best grapplers in the sport. Putting them in Metamoris, I believe, would be a good move for both organizations.
Yeah, I'd like to see Gary Tonnen v Gunnar Nelson. I think that could be very interesting. Um, Ronda Rousey v Gabby Garcia could be fun.
I mean, Gabby would crush her. Gabby would crush
Literally
you and
crush her.
me at the same time.
Yeah, no, Gabby would literally crush her. You know, that's never going to happen. UFC are not going to let Ronda lose, and Metamoris don't have enough money to get Ronda up. I know Ronda's close with the guys that run it, but I don't think that'll ever happen. Hollywood wouldn't want it to happen, and the UFC wouldn't want it to happen, so it's just not going to happen. Gabby would most likely crush her. Gabby'd crush bloody 80% of the male competitors alone. She's what, 6'4", 200 odd pounds. She's a beast. Just in size basis, she's just manhandled Ronda.
I mean, like, let's be real here, dude. If Metamoris called us right now and said they would pay us $500,000 to take on Gabby at the same time, I'm taking half of that money and putting it on her to beat us both in less than 2 minutes.
Yeah,
right
it's
now.
crazy.
Cause she's a monster, and I hope, I'm not saying it in a way that kind of offends people, but she is a bona fide wrecking machine when it comes to jiu-jitsu, regardless of any gender or anything like that. So I would doubt that the UFC would even kind of contemplate putting her against Rousey if the opportunity did come out. But there are other women out there who are world champions, are multiple time world champions, who are within the same weight class, who would be an interesting matchup for Ronda if she was to kind of go that route.
Plus, with fighting someone like Gabby Garcia, there's the apprehension because Metamoris aren't testing drugs. They've got Chael Sonnen fighting. They've got Andre Galvao, who's made this huge body transformation since he fought in MMA fighting as well. To me, if I'm someone like Ronda who is clean, I would not want to fight with Metamoris when guys aren't tested.
I definitely can agree with you there. Like that's a whole another part of the conversation point there because like they mentioned, they're going to allow Chael Sonnen to fight. They're going to allow Galvao to fight. Josh Barnett has failed tests like in the past, so like there's definitely that questionable aspect there. Didn't Robert Drysdale fight for one of the early Metamoris events?
To be honest, I'm not really sure too. Obviously, Robert Drysdale's history in Jiu-Jitsu is quite amazing. It speaks for himself and what he's done. But obviously, he's failed a drug test recently, and it's his second drug test in a row. I'm not sure if he's passed the drug test. Like I haven't heard of him ever passing a drug test. I know he has the medical problems, but he said he needed TRT, he couldn't go around with TRT, and now he's saying that his testosterone levels are naturally as high as they were, which is just ridiculous.
Yeah, like him and Kevin Casey both failed tests this weekend, and the way they handled it, they took completely different paths. Kevin Casey fessed up to it. He apologized, and he said, he was trying. He took something to help him make weight. And you have Robert on one side who already has one failed test behind his name, claiming that he's naturally gotten up to a point where if his testosterone is that high as it was, then he needs to be running around with the S on his chest fighting crime instead of fighting like in the cage because he's bona fide a superhero at that point in time. So I just find it sad that we're still having these conversations, we're still having these issues. And what's interesting is when the news came out for both of these guys' field tests, I saw one mention of it and then nothing else. It's almost getting to the point where baseball is, where you see guys failing tests left and right, and it's like, oh well, on to the next game.
Yeah, it's crazy. Just looking at Kevin Casey, if you're going to random steroid test anyone after a fight, it's going to be Kevin Casey. Just look at the guy just oozes muscularity and testosterone. So I think it's funny that he's saying that he took steroids, anabolic steroids, to help him cut weight, which makes absolutely no sense.
I mean, yeah, it's unfortunate that we're getting to this point within the sport. I hope it changes. I don't see it changing. You've always said that you would rather steroids be legal and guys be able to take whatever they want as long as they're honest and open about it, which is one thing, but that's just too dangerous of a sport when we see somebody start hulking up in the middle of the cage, throwing guys over the top of the octagon. I think that's just going to be a problem that we have to deal with.
Yeah, that's why we watch Metamours, because guys are juiced up, grappling each other. I think that kind of is interesting to watch just as a fan. These guys, well, even any jiu-jitsu tournament at a high level now until recently has been notorious for guys cheating and coming in huge, just jacked up on steroids. And I think it's somewhat interesting watching how that goes. It's going to be somewhat interesting seeing how Galvao and Shell do against each other too.
Yeah, I mean, it'll be an interesting card regardless. I plan on watching it. I'm definitely looking forward to seeing how it all goes down. But man, like, I just hope we don't have any issues coming out of it that end. So for the last segment of this week's show, we're going to talk about what we have coming forward from the sport of MMA in August. What do you, what are some of your expectations? You know, there aren't very many big name fights. I want to say probably the biggest event this whole month is UFC 177, where we have two title fights, and even those two fights aren't the biggest UFC champions at this point in time, both in size and in name. So, what do you expect from MMA this coming month, and does it make you kind of excited for how the year is shaping up?
Yeah, for me, the end of the year for MMA is going to be pretty amazing. There's so much great fights lined up, and I think this hiatus, this temporary hiatus, is what the sport really needed to get more people interested. People are asking when's the next card, when's the next card, and there's some genuine excitement about these cards building up. The John Jones card is going to be huge. I think that fight's going to outsell any fight John Jones has ever had, and that's purely because of this month of build up and the opportunity to market John Jones and Daniel Cormier because of the lull in the media with potential fights coming up.
So, what is that? So, how are you kind of spending your time away from the sport right now, since there is a slight lull?
Yeah, well, I'd originally planned to do the Henry Felipe interview for last week, but then Tom DeBlas contacted me about some comments that King Mo made in the lead up to their fight, so I interviewed Tom and put that up instead. Henry's flying out to South Africa today, so I'm going to hook up and try to get an interview with him. I'm going to try Skype an interview with him during the week and the build up of his first title defense over there. So that's pretty much what I'm going to focus on this week. What about yourself?
I not really sure yet. Not even gonna lie. I haven't. I definitely have enjoyed the rest of this week, kind of moving away from MMA as a whole. It's kind of a good time because it's been very quiet in sport across the board. So I haven't really been doing too much. So I'm gonna have to basically kind of spend the rest of tonight to see what some of the bigger stories are and kind of get immersed. I plan on doing something on Metamours 4 this coming weekend. So I think that's a big card. But outside of that, I don't have any set plans. I'm trying to get an interview with Gary Tunin, but I haven't been able to secure that yet either.
That could be interesting. I'm guessing Gary's going to be crazy busy, obviously, with the preparations for this. It's probably the biggest match of his life, really, will it? It'll be the most viewed match he'll ever have. Well, it has had so far.
Yeah, you know, like he put on a great show against Kron Gracie at ADCC in China last year. He definitely put on a great show. He was able to take Crohn's back, and unfortunately, he did get submitted at the end. But I think that this is, you know, this, like you mentioned, this is his biggest fight of his career so far. I think he's going to do well. Gary doesn't stop. He doesn't understand the idea of not going hard 100% of the time. So I think he's going to take the win, and I think it'll be a good stepping stone for him going forward. But just looking at everything as a whole, you know, you can definitely continue following MMA Ratings on Instagram and Twitter at MMA Ratings Net. In both of those sites, you can follow me at rgarcia_sports, and you can follow Roy Billington at Roy Billington. Be sure to check out MMARatings.net every day because we continuously have content coming out, and we will be back this coming Sunday for another edition of MMARatings.net. So thanks Roy, and I look forward to talking to you next week. Roy, you hear me? All right, well, I guess he must have dropped off the face of the earth, but we will be back next week, and we look forward to talking to you then. Have a great week, everybody.